Here I go, answering questions for non-Christians and showing why these kinds of questions are never impressive. It's got fail written all over it. If you wondered why atheists don't take the claims of the religious seriously, here's why. So I decided to split this up into 2 videos to keep it from getting absurdly long, but these are the first 15 out of 30 questions from a Christian posed to non-Christians on a blog that I stumbled across. And unsurprisingly, all of these questions suck. They come from the standpoint of a true believer, not a skeptic, not someone who cares if the answers to these questions are true or whether the questions themselves make any sense. It's a very poor attempt at a gotcha that goes over like a lead balloon. And I'll point out exactly why they fail as we go on, because this kind of questionnaire is very common and unfortunately painfully terrible. So let's go take a look. Question 1. Are you certain that God does not exist, or that you can't know whether he exists? Neither. Absolute certainty is impossible to rationally achieve. I only go where the best evidence leads, and that isn't to any kind of God. Now, should that change, then I will believe in a God, but not until. Now, I certainly don't think that I can know whether or not a God exists for sure. In fact, in order to believe in a God, I must know that God is real, or at least have really good corroboratory evidence that said God is real. If I don't, I will never believe it. I can't believe it. That's why I don't believe. Number 2. How do you know that? Well, since I sidestepped the false dichotomy previously, I can't really answer that question as presented. Therefore, I'm going to turn this question around on the believers and ask them how they know that the God they claim is real actually is. And no, I don't buy into faith. Faith is the excuse you give yourself to believe in something for which you have no good reason. Every single claim the religious make comes from blind faith. It doesn't matter what the claim is, they have no means whatsoever of backing it up, of independently or objectively verifying that what they think is true actually is, and this is a problem for rational people. Too bad the religious aren't rational. Question 3. Did you use your 5 senses to come to that decision? Well, there's still no decision made, but no, I didn't. I used my brain to examine the situation rationally and make the best supported decision currently available. Of course, everything is provisional. Tomorrow, we might make some discovery that overturns everything that we thought we understood about the universe, and all of these decisions will have to be re-examined in light of the new evidence. But at the moment, which is the only way we can actually make any determinations at all, I see no reason to think that any gods of any kind actually exist. Thus, I don't believe in them. Number 4. Given that God is by definition a spirit, how much sense does it make to decide whether he exists using your 5 physical senses? But that's the problem, because God cannot be, by definition, anything. That's just made up. It's like saying the invisible pink unicorn is, by definition, pink. How do you know? How did you verify this? You didn't. It just sounded good to you, so you adopted it as a given when it's anything but. But I really wanted to point something out, something that some of you might have already recognized. But this is really common in these religious questionnaires, if you notice. They make a lot of assumptions about how you're going to answer, and the next question is always meant to address what they assume you'll say. But I never answer that way, so it never works on me. I spend a lot of time going, that does not apply. Because a lot of apologists have this weird picture in their head of what atheists are, And that picture never accurately depicts what atheists actually are. It's a straw man, and they run around beating it, making a fool of themselves, while atheists just stare at them and shake their heads. The problem here isn't the atheists. It's the ideas about atheists that the religious ignorantly have. Question 5. Did you use your reasoning to determine God does not exist? No, because I don't hold that position. Again, this is a straw man from the religious side. I don't believe God doesn't exist. I just don't believe he does. And the same goes for Bigfoot. I don't believe Bigfoot isn't real. I just see no reason to think that he is. And that goes for gods, Bigfoot, aliens, the Loch Ness Monster, and pretty much anything else that is not evident in objective reality. And this seems to confuse the religious. They really don't know how to handle someone like me. Some have simply declared that I'm an agnostic and moved on. But that's not a solution because I still don't believe in their imaginary friend. I'm just too hard to categorize and deal with using standard terrible apologetic methods. Question 6. How do you know your reasoning is working correctly? Well, I don't, but you have to start somewhere. I can know nothing for absolutely certain, but my reasoning faculties seem to be functioning fine for everything else. Why would I suddenly start to doubt them when it comes to the existence of God? And of course, this question can be just as easily applied to the religious, many of whom seem to think that belief in God is reasonable and rational. How do they know? Because I, at least, can set up a chain of logical reasoning for why I reject unsupported claims about imaginary friends. They can do nothing of the sort. They can only make massive leaps of illogic from, well, there might be something, to, it has to be my God! And that's not how things work. Number 7. Did you use your reasoning to determine your reasoning was working? No more so than you did. And even if that were the case, I don't have to use my reasoning. I can avail myself to other people's reasoning as well. I can also use the codified laws of logic to test whether what I have going on in my head matches up with the best thinking of the best minds. And so far, it is. The same cannot be said of the religious, who engage in endless fallacies because their position is emotional, not intellectual. My position is rational. It has nothing at all to do with feelings. My position is testable, unlike the religious. So I've got a better grasp on things than the religiously delusional by any objective measure. Question 8. Do you see the problem with that? No. I get the problem you want me to see with it, but since I didn't answer the way you expected, your gotcha question fell completely flat. Don't the religious ever get tired of failing? Question 9. The Bible says that skepticism about God is the result of a mind suppressing what it knows to be true. Have you ever tried doubting your doubts about God? All right, I don't care what the Bible says. The Bible is a book of mythology. And have I tried doubting my doubts? Well, sure. But as I said previously, I am never going to believe without evidence, so I already know what it will take to doubt my doubts. And until that comes to pass, why should I bother trying to believe something that I am rationally incapable of believing? It makes no sense at all. Number 10. The Bible contains hundreds of prophecies fulfilled hundreds of years after they were written. How would it be possible without God? Well, it is hundreds of claimed prophecies, all of which are vague, often ripped entirely out of context, and quote-unquote fulfilled, only in the sense that later religious writers looked up passages in the old texts and purposely cherry-picked out supposed prophecies to fulfill to give their writings legitimacy. We don't actually have any proof of a single specific prophecy, something that is clearly referring only to a single possible future event which was fulfilled exactly in accordance with the original text. We don't have anywhere in the Bible that says, on the 4th of November, 1872, a person by this name will be in this location and this specific event will happen to them. That simply doesn't exist, and that's why none of it is impressive. If that's the best the Bible can do, then don't be surprised when skeptics think it's all a load of bunk. Question 11. The Bible says that objective moral values are based in God's morally perfect nature. Without God, what do you think they're based in? Okay, good for the Bible. Why should I care? And I don't think objective moral values exist at all, so asking where they come from is kind of ridiculous when you think about it. This is just another case where they're expecting atheists to go, well, of course wait a minute. This is not a rational position to take, even though there are some atheists who still hold to objective morality for emotional reasons. Now, it reminds me of a recent discussion I had where one person declared that slavery was objectively wrong and that all slave owners actually knew that it was wrong. They just chose to do it anyhow. Yeah, it kind of sounds like that religious argument where we all know God is real, we just like to sin. It's just stupid. I kind of bet these people didn't run it past any actual slave owners because there are still plenty of them out there, and guess what? I don't think they think what they're doing is wrong. I'm sure these people sleep perfectly fine at night, but a lot of people want to believe that what they believe is automatically true, so they don't have to bother thinking about it too much or defending it independently. It's just automatically right. Because whether people like it or not, morality gets kind of sticky when you have to actually consider why we ought to hold it and why it should be defended. It's never black and white, and that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. It doesn't change the facts, though. Number 12. Jesus' disciples went from being terrified of death to being willing to die for their belief that Jesus rose from the dead. If Jesus didn't rise, what do you think changed their mind? Well, the stories about the disciples in a book of mythology say that. We don't even have good evidence that most of the disciples were even real, any more than we have any reason to think that Jesus, the man God described in the Bible, ever existed. So we have to take all of that with a pound or two of salt, which the religious simply do not want to do. They want to assume that everything in the Bible is true, which simply cannot be rationally defended in any way. Question 13. There are hundreds of varieties of unbelief. How do you know yours is the right one? What does that even mean? That's like saying there are hundreds of ways not to have cancer. How do you know yours is the right one? There is no right or wrong method, only a right or wrong conclusion. So long as my beliefs, or lack thereof, are not based on irrationality, I'm doing just fine. Thanks for asking. Number 14. Archaeology is constantly confirming the details of the accounts in the Bible. Why do you think that is if the Bible isn't true? Well, actually, it's not. Yes, you can confirm, for example, that Jerusalem existed. I mean, that's obvious. But that doesn't mean that anyone rose from the dead there. I can go back to the story of the Trojan War. No one took it at all seriously until archaeology discovered evidence that the war itself actually happened. Now, that doesn't mean that the tales of gods and goddesses involved in this war are actually real. The only way to prove the resurrection is to find objectively demonstrable evidence that it happened. You'd have to find independent, contemporary, corroboratory accounts written by demonstrable eyewitnesses, and we don't have that. We know the Gospels were not written by eyewitnesses, and certainly not by any of the so-called disciples. The evidence just doesn't fit. You can't say that, hey, this place mentioned on page 1138 of the Bible exists, therefore every word of the Bible is true. It doesn't work that way. Every word, every story, every passage, they all have to be independently verified, and they simply cannot be. And finally, for this part, number 15, there is more evidence that Jesus Christ lived, died, and came back to life than for just about any other event in ancient history. If God did not exist, or Jesus' claims to be God were not true, then how would you explain his resurrection? Well, that's easy. It never happened. This is just more blind assertion that the Bible is true because the religious want the Bible to be true. There is no evidence of any kind that Jesus described in the Bible was ever real. None at all. For other events, we have direct archaeological and anthropological evidence for those events, backed up with demonstrable eyewitness accounts by people who were actually there. You've got none of that for the resurrection, no matter how much you desperately wish you did. This is just vastly overselling a narrative that does not stand up to scrutiny on its own. And the religious don't like that fact. Many of them will point out that lots of people believe it. Okay, so what? Lots of people believe they've been abducted by aliens too. That doesn't make it so. Just because people are convinced of a position for emotional reasons doesn't make the evidence for that claim any stronger. I don't care about what people believe. I care about what people can prove. And going strictly by the evidence, the biblical resurrection story does nothing but fall over drunk in the gutter. I'm sorry to hurt your feelings. Well, wait a minute. No, I'm not. So that's the first part of 30 questions for non-Christians, and I honestly have to say I'm not at all impressed. This is trying to predict badly what atheists will say, and when an atheist goes down a different path, the whole thing falls apart. So many of these are based on blind faith and wishful thinking, and they don't stand up to any rational evaluation. I don't get why the religious think that the non-religious are going to take their books of mythology seriously. We're not, and if that's all you've got, then you might as well give up because you're just wasting everyone's time. I will be impressed with the Bible the minute any believer produces objective evidence that it's true. Not just some of it, not just the easy bits, but all of it. Every story they want to pretend is true needs to be proven with evidence that it actually is. Otherwise, no. Why would I? Why would anyone with half a brain in their head? It makes no sense at all. But the religious are desperate to cling to these silly stories, and they expect everyone else to do so as well, because they do. Of course, we won't, because we have much higher standards, and I don't know that they understand what standards are. We don't care about feelings, we care about facts. They're exactly the opposite, and that's where they run into trouble. But anyway, I will be back with the other half of this list, and honestly, I don't expect it to get any better. It could be worse, in fact, I don't know. But this is why the religious do not impress the non-religious, because they've got no idea how reality or credibility or rationality function. They just have their wishes and dreams, and we want nothing at all to do with wishes and dreams. We want facts, and the religious, as is painfully clear, wouldn't know a fact if it bit them. And that's sad.